So welcome everybody. This is going to be a fun and interesting session on your cake and eat it too, leveraging automation with actually also a true business focus. To get into a little bit of that, of course, we're talking about data warehousing. We're talking about Data Vault. And so collaboratively, we're working together now to present this with Genesee Academy for Data Vault training certification, and also with Petter Bellis for Data Vault Builder for the automation components of this.
So welcome everybody. My name is Peter. I have a background in data warehousing, and I will show in the second part how we take business models and convert them into working code. Thank you, Hans.
Which is the magic right there. Thank you, Petter. Okay, so let's take a first look at the topic for the day. And I'm going to start my timer here to make sure I stay good. Otherwise, my timer will be bad. Data Vault modeling, for those of you that are doing it, you probably already know it's really well suited for automation purposes. It's actually been utilized in that way really from the very beginning. Whether it was a matter of using the templates based on repeatable patterns in more manual purposes or ways, functions, to automation tooling itself. Leveraging automation for the data warehouse using Data Vault is definitely a useful way to go, right? Converting from sources, however, just to create source-based data vaults is not that interesting. And it's not that interesting because it really doesn't solve the business-driven enterprise integration requirements that we have in the data warehouse. So for the data warehouse target model that we have, we need to base that on the business concepts, or we refer to core business concepts, and the natural business relationships that exist on the business level. And so the real question is can we create a true business-driven enterprise model and still leverage automation to make all this happen? Spoiler alert, let's hope we can. Let's get back to automation as a starting point. So now we're going back in history, but also looking at automation from a general perspective. If you go back 50, 60 years, really computer systems were designed to help automate existing business processes. And so the definition I'm writing here saying technology supporting a business process, performing typically more tedious tasks that are well suited for computer systems, right? That's just a general definition for what we've been doing for decades and decades with automation in the world of IT. It's well suited for things that tend to be consistent, structured, clearly definable tasks and things, repeatable, of course, and ideally stable. And these two things are different, right? Consistent meaning that it's consistently applied, and stable meaning that it's not subject to change very often. So we can automate the process of something that we expect to be done in about the same way for a longer period of time. But the bottom line is that this form of automation has been extremely successful. There have been some glitches and bugs along the way. We're still, of course, applying ourselves in IT in general, but clearly there's a benefit. Now, when we apply the automation principles to the enterprise data warehouse, and we've seen this over the years in data warehousing for sure, the automation meeting data warehousing means that it's been well suited for things like, well, if we're repeating things for OLAP for downstream deliverables, supporting and reporting processes, automation of the population and delivery of data is definitely part of it. And then we have the other part of it, which is the ETL function, or the mapping and source to target movement of data, generating code, executing and maintaining that code, and managing it, helping to manage it. That has been, and continues to be, a super strong component of it. However, even though it's been successful for these purposes, when we apply to the enterprise data warehouse, we recognize more profoundly the chasm we have, the distance, the divide between technical source systems and the enterprise data warehouse model. So many of you probably have that as an issue that you're dealing with now, or you are about to be running into this issue as you go further along. And that is that it's easier to grab from a source system and bring it in, right? And then we have a vaulted source. but there's really no integration or warehouse direction taken in that process. So the enterprise business model that we're trying to serve is really not happening, right, from those perspectives. Now, there's a couple reasons for this, and we're going to get into the reasons. And by the way, the problem has multiple parts, but let's get into the different parts of it. The real root of this chasm, the real root of the divide, has to do with just in general, the IT business communication gap, right? So there's just always going to be there. And I think when I was in school getting my degree, this was in MIS, which was supposed to be the kind of fill in the blank between the business and the technology side of the organization. We still deal with that divide every day. And there's communication issues, of course, how things are captured, what does it mean, whatever else is going on. We have a lot of issues there. We try and we work hard on this. We do try to communicate because we know that communication is the main issue. We know that semantic gap, meaning different meanings for words or the meaning that can be used to be communicated using many different words. These semantic issues are always going to be there. We also have issues of, and we'll get into that on perspective. But for now, let's just consider a group getting together to talk. They're deciding, hey, we're going to talk about what it is that we have for a requirement or for what constitutes our business model. So we talk about vendor. Someone else says, oh, no, it's a person. It's a higher level. Someone else says, no, we say supplier. Someone is working with IBM models, no longer supported, but party, involved party, and then manufacturer, et cetera. In the end, we try to distill this and come up with, okay, let's agree we're referring to the same thing now from an integration perspective, maybe, but just even within our operational system, let's talk about it. It's vendor, okay? Well, there's communication gap issues here. And one of the issues is just like the old telephone game discussion. You say, one thing, and then by the time it gets to the other end of the telephone chain, it's an entirely different word, right? You're saying my cat has fleas, and then you whisper to someone else who whispers it to someone else who whispers it to someone else, and the end result is my car is in the shop because it's just been the communications have broken down at some point. What the speaker meant to say, there's a speaker's bias because a speaker also has word choices, past experiences, there's tone of voice, there's things that communicate what I'm doing with my biases. When you're listening to it and trying to absorb it, you have also experiences, worldviews, your interpretation of what you think I'm trying to say, what my business is trying to say, and then what the listener actually heard. These things are always going to be with us, these biases and issues of communication. We also have things like just pure on perspective, right? And context, business context. So here is a really just good cartoon visual. It's definitely the number 9. And by the same token, it's also definitely the number 6. They're both correct, right? And they're both looking at the exact same thing. And this is one of the issues we have today is just getting through not just the communication itself, but also the issues of what does it mean from a perspective and from a business context perspective, how is it being applied and used? So for central meaning, that's a huge issue. And of course, this can now get further complicated because in an organization, we have different departments, divisions, and functions that exist, and each of them work pretty much autonomously doing their part of the puzzle. It's all fine until we start thinking about getting it integrated into a warehouse environment. So let's say what happened here is the different divisions, functions are each working on their own piece of this puzzle at this point. So as we started, maybe it was a sales function, or well, yeah, I'll say sales. They ended up with vendor, and then a different group now is doing a same session for maybe it's accounting, and now they're talking about third parties and third party types. And then there's another group that's involved, and they're talking about party, and then party type role relation, and it gets to a different model altogether. Why is this part important? Well, because we won't get around to fixing this issue I'm going to say, for probably many, many decades. And that is to say that within an organization, people will want to deploy best of breed and specific software applications to support what their function, department, division is doing, right? For them to get a generic system with terminology that's supposed to be good for everybody is really not realistic, because it's not going to allow them to be competitive and to pick their own path for what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, so that's one of the big issues here, that we have to contend with. There's going to be these different ones no matter what we do. So now what we end up with is we have three different, in this case, models represented by three different functions within the organization. We're not really that keenly aware that this is an issue so much. Because why? Because each of these is working fine within their own business division or department. It's only when we start talking integration we run into the issue. But let's just say, where did this complexity come from in the first place? Like, if we know that we're dealing with a vendor of a product, how did I end up with somebody designing a system that says third party type, another one that says party type relation, party role? Where did this all come from? Well, as it turns out, like you can see from the picture here, there in a nutshell is our marketing plan. Any questions, right? It's coming from us, right? Life is simple. This process is actually pretty simple, but it's us that complicate it, right? We want to analyze and figure out how we can codify what we're looking at. And so we do abstractions and subtypes and different complex, iterations on what we're looking at. From an operational business perspective, we're really not going to solve that problem anytime very soon. And if you're on this particular presentation, likely that's not the scope of your work. You're dealing with data warehousing, ostensibly enterprise data warehousing, and also using Data Vault. So now, what does this all mean? Well, in the end, now we've got source systems, right? We have source systems that have come to play. We know that the first 3 of 5 sources I'm going to use, for example, look something like this. In the promise of enterprise data warehousing, now we're going to switch to just purely what we're looking to try to do, is we want to integrate all this source data into a common enterprise data warehouse, and then from there use the same curated, right, integrated, historized information conformed, and we want to send that information to, well, provide it to whatever marts or other downstream deliverables want to consume it. So it's gonna kind of look like this. And this picture is, well, it's been with us since the better part of, let's say, probably 40 years. If you look at Belemann's original writings, and then also the book of Claudian and where they went on from there, this was actually part of the original thinking, right? In general, I mean, there's multiple depictions of this, but integrate data into a common integrated source, and then from there allow there to be reporting from that point out. Realistically, this integration is hard work to do, especially if you're just trying to piece it together when it comes in. And so what ended up happening, and is still out there, of course, this still happens today, is that, well, let's say we're in the 90s, we start with marts, we're going to take and just pull the data from all these sources and create a mart individually each time. And I'm sure you've all seen a similar image to this before. We've been using it for probably 25 years, 30 maybe. It's the issue that data warehousing is designed to solve, right? That's what this is all about. If we leverage an automation of Vault modeling, and let's say, again, we want to use Vault modeling in our data warehouse architecture, right? We want to use it as our main platform for a modeling tool. And the reason for that is because it's agile, right? It adapts to change elegantly. There's far less re-engineering. We can base a concept in there now and then add to it with more satellites and relationships over time. It's super flexible. It works great. Historization works easier because of the distribution among satellites. Key integration around a hub means that we still have our ability to have basically consistent forms without having silos or data anomalies. So all the good reasons we do Vault. But if we don't have that initial model to aim at, what's going to happen is, let's say raw, it doesn't matter. By the way, definitions here don't really matter. Call it whatever you want. But if you have a persisted vaulted layer, whatever that persisted vaulted layer is, and it's just going to be one-to-one with source because you're push button converting, automating the process of converting a source to a target, you're going to end up with, yeah, okay, a vaulted persisted set of table structures that are still not integrated because you haven't addressed integration yet, right? The integration part of the picture has not been discussed. And by the way, this is, I would say, I'm going to say 2 points about it. It's interesting, and it's also maybe a bit ironic or unfortunate because we're aware of this issue, and we have been aware of this issue for quite some time. And yet in today's world, the majority of people are still focused on, well, let's say at least a picture that looks something like this, right? And so basically dealing with a business integration later after the fact, right? Rather than saying, let's start with a business target and then map to that target. So this is kind of a problem we've had for a long time. We understand the problem, but we're still doing it. One of the questions that might come up is why? Why are we still doing this, even though we are aware of the issue? And I would say, speculation wise, or just from my own experience, is integration is hard. Or that is to say, we probably make it hard, right? We probably make it difficult to integrate. But in the end, I think it is fully feasible to pull off. What then is the solution to get to this picture that we wanted in the first place? You know, how are we going to get from what we've already determined earlier in the presentation is that we're going to have disparate sources that are developed at different times by different groups for different purposes that don't fully align with each other, right? That aren't really the same model. We're going to pull them into a stage, either temporary or persisted. And now we want to move to an integrated business-facing enterprise data warehouse layer. And the answer, as far as we can determine at this point, and what's been succeeding in our experience, is you need the business model on top of it. You need to be able to say, I'm going to base this enterprise warehouse on an enterprise-wide business model that we can all map to. And so one of the things I mentioned is integration is hard. That's why we haven't been doing the integration, and that's definitely true. And the other part of it is we haven't had a good opportunity to create these business models. One, because, well, it's hard work to try to figure out what it is. And number two is we don't really get that audience with the business users very frequently. It's not common to get it. So we're addressing kind of two parts of this. One is that we need to have that communication with business. So now we need to make that appealing and interesting and compelling for business to do. And that also means we have to do a very light touch and do it quickly and not make it technical. And then from there, we can focus on the mappings to the enterprise business model. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at this picture, if you also want to do a one-for-one vaulted persisted layer, sure. But remember, it still didn't solve the problem of having that enterprise model view. So in that case, it's an additional layer, which of course is fine if that's what you want to do. But we still have to address the business integration layer. So now the question is, you know, can we get a business model for the target, right? A business model for the target that maps well with Data Vault and is basically a direct mapping from what we do with business to identifying core business concept and natural business relation to an ensemble logical model, as we refer to this, is basically a very kind of conceptual logical view of a Data Vault model. And then, of course, you can see this goes directly into Pedder's part of the section, which is, can you then take this model and automate it and create the warehouse? And that's exactly what Pedder can do, and we'll show you. So we're going to use a case example called Groombark. And I'm not going to get into the details and the degree of the case. You can get into details with us later on that if you're interested in it. But basically, the idea is that the Groombark case is just a small dog grooming service where you can drop off your dog at this shop location, and a specialist will be assigned and work with you on grooming the dog, and et cetera, et cetera. Again, just the highlights of the business case. We use a set of templates. We call them Elm templates, but this is our business mapping with Ensemble Logical Modeling. The reason why we like business mapping using Ensemble Logical Modeling is because of the direct map to vault structures, right? It basically fits the purpose of defining what the vault structures will be, which interestingly also fits the definition of the business concepts that we're actually working with. So this is a pure business model approach. It's, you can use other forms of modeling, of course, more 3NF entity style conceptual models. You can use some node edge graph styles. You can do fact oriented. There's other things you can do to come to your business model, conceptual business model. But this is one that we found is working well. And so this is one we're using for a case example. All these artifacts, by the way, for creating these models are available on the website, and there's no cost to any of that if you want to try to apply it and use it. Basically, core business concept canvas, we've split things out, not surprisingly, by event, person, place, thing. If it's not immediately identifiable, we put it into other concept. We do a little bit of working to address duplicates and missing CVCs to distill these within the swim lanes. Again, pure business view, so we can still do this with business users. In the end, we start to look at the event canvas, which if you're into dimensional modeling, has a little bit of paying homage to effect in matrix of some kind, because really what we're talking about is the event drives, of course, a lot of the metrics. What are the concepts that relate to that event? Very similar to the metrics approach that we might have with something like effect in matrix. And these things will actually help us to define the natural business relationships between the concepts. In the end, we're going to end up with a business map based on what we call, we'll call ELM model, Ensemble Logical Modeling instance. This one will show us the core business concepts and the natural business relationships that associate them. And if you're interested in more details on that, that's also something available for either download or there's video lessons on YouTube, or you can contact us about more information. Pretty simple to do, but in the end, these end up being the hubs and links of the foundational model itself. We also define satellites to a certain level. That is to say, the context on concepts to a certain level through this process. Okay, so this ends up being where we go, and then from there, now we're back to the picture I showed you earlier. But what we've done so far now is really identified through Elm workshops, which, by the way, it might be 2 hours each for a couple times a week for a couple weeks. I mean, it's not a long thing with business users. And we established that business model, that conceptual business model. We use that as the template for the warehouse. And this is where we now pass this to Pedder at Data Vault Builder and say, can we now use automation to help us drive the creation of this pure business-facing integrated model, that is to say, fully feasible to be integrated now into a data warehouse architecture, and then look at the source mappings and all the transformations that the technology of the warehouse itself. And so, yeah, we here, you can see from the portion up top, which is in living color, and the grayed out portion below, we're now passing this on to Pedder and Data Vault Builder for them to take it from here, as we were to say. Can we make that happen? And yeah, we absolutely feel that we can. Okay, and so there you go. That is it for my portion. I've got 1 minute and 9 seconds left. So, Petter, let me know how you want to proceed to the next part.
Good.
Yeah.
So I will pick it up from here, and thank you for the introduction, because we believe, and I think we agree on that, we are solving here a business problem and not a technical problem. So we should come from the business side, talk about business terms, and deliver to it the technical data and collect the data for it, but first to understand what we want to achieve. By the way, I hope it doesn't get loud behind me. They started somehow breaking down the building behind me, but we will see.
Okay. Hopefully they don't do it until after, right?
Yeah, we
All right.
asked them
Thanks,
kindly
Petter.
to wait until 5 o'clock, but who
Yeah.
knows? So let's share my screen now. So my topic here is now about model-driven automation, and we're using a tool for that. And if you want to see how the Data Vault Builder compares to other tools on the market, we have on the webpage as well some comparisons against the big vendors. I will not go into details here, but for me, the most important thing is that we see here is that we are top ranked in the time to market category because we work very agile. But this doesn't mean that we just go and do something, but we need to do the right thing, prioritize it, and this is the business model that steers what we are doing. And this is the main thing, that we try to bring the people in the company together. We have the business users, they need their KPIs, maybe they're application owners of some applications needing data. And we have the IT department with maybe data engineers. We have somewhere maybe data modelers in between. But in many companies that we've seen, they don't work so well together because they don't have one mean of communication. And if they have maybe between the data modelers and the business people, then the IT people need to take this, manually implement it. They maybe figure out that in the data there's something different than the business user expected, fix that in really good way, but they forget to communicate it back. If the business users try to use the data, it looks different. They don't understand what they received. And really many good projects failed, what I have seen, just because IT and business was not talking to each other. Now, how do we solve that? Because data modeling tools are not new, or these approaches are not new, but before, if you just created this kind of models and you try to implement it manually, it takes maybe weeks or months. So it takes very long. It's manual work. So the people stopped using data modeling because it didn't deliver enough value. Here, in real time, we start generating directly the physical implementations, so table load statements out of the box. Still, the IT and the data engineers can add to it, add new rules, add new definitions to it that need to be added, extended, change the model even if it's not correct after looking onto the data. But the moment they finish, the data model is updated based on the implementation. And now, if the business users consume data, they get all the metadata they worked on together with IT and receive as well meaning for their data. Now, good point. If you want to ask any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. And before I go on with my part, I would start a quick poll that we want to do already, but let's do this now. Give me 1 second to start it. And the question is about, is your data warehouse already aligned with your business model? Do you work on that, or is it more a technical driven term thing, or are there two departments working completely separately? Good. I would share the result that we see is about half-half. That's already good. When we did that like 3 years ago, it was probably most of the people would say no. Now, more and more people understand that this should be one thing to work together on these topics. So what is the process? What we do is we start with the business model, and we can model in the Data Vault Builder, but we're always happy if somebody already delivers this model, and we will show at that how to import that. If you have other modeling tools in your company, that's perfectly fine. If you have papers with post-its on your wall, that's perfectly fine to start as long as you know what your business model is. The second thing is that we usually do, we go and connect directly with the tool to our source systems. We can preview the data, verify that what we are expecting here is found as well in the data. In the next step, we map by using the business key that was either already delivered in the modeling phase or now discovered by the data engineers. We link the data from the source tables to the data model, and here all loading and historization happens. So here we have a fully integrated model with history, with relations between the different concepts, and all the metadata that we generate here is available to the report user, consumable through REST APIs and many other things. But nobody can access the data yet. Already Bill was saying, never let people access your core warehouse. It would block your refactoring options, and it's too complicated. We have temporality in here, sometimes temporality that we can generate. So never let people access. So give them access here. And this is the nice thing that we have as well seen, that we have the natural business relations between concepts, that we can go in the direction of a dimensional model, create output, select columns, and now we have a proper interface to offer that to our data consumers. And at the end, we can add business rules or not. And it's more complex what we can do with multiple cycles going through, enrich the data. I will not explain this here. The basic thing that I want to show is how we deal with the models that we receive. So the complicated thing is here that we really need to solve many more problems than just modeling and code generation. And this is what some automation tools concentrate on, and it's an important part, but around it, we need more to become agile. We need to generate as well at the same time, we model as well the documentation, the data lineage. We need to automate our infrastructure setup so we can do our feature sandboxes very quickly. We need to profile the data in the process. And then we need to deploy our changes between the different environments. So we need to bring it somehow in a Git process. When we do that, we need to automate that. We need to automate regression testing, and we need to version our code somewhere, most probably in Git. And when we have finished all the development and deployment process, we come to operations. So we need to run our stuff, and the bigger the data warehouses get, we need to parallelize now all this by scheduling it, reloading, delta loading, CDC, stream loading into our targets. And maybe high availability being a target as well. So there's a lot of stuff, and all of that, or at least most of that, can be already driven if we know the model, and from the model, by automation, we can create all the other parts. How is that working? The first thing is we go, and this is regarding what the model is that we receive. We need to extract the metadata from the models we receive, and the meta models may be post-its on the wall, a picture. Then probably somebody goes in and clicks then in the front end to create a model. But here, if we get Excel sheets like we receive from Hans, we can extract the metadata from the Excel sheets, and then we map them on a so-called meta model. And this is a model about the model. So we are mapping then the concepts to one object. We are mapping the context to one concept in here, the relations, the columns, the source tables. And like that, we get an overview, a standardized view of your model in a format where we can generate now a so-called deployment package into the data vault builder. Why don't we write just a one-time script or something like that? Is this process is usually not one time. This process is usually many, many steps, one after the other, because you will continue modeling here. And with every model iteration you do here, you want to be able to reproduce this kind of step, and you want to be able to deploy only the changes that you've done in your model in your technical implementation. And I have simulated this kind of process with this nice example that Hans was mentioning at the end. And for every step they did in the modeling exercise, we generated one of these packages using our so-called migration vault approach. And I will show you how this ends up in the Data Vault Builder and how it looks like. And I will as well project into the future what happens if we then connect it to data and what the value is of working with a model in the data warehouse. So just a little bit a bigger picture of our migration vault. So we have here the hubs, we have the links, the uploads, we have the relations between different objects, and this is very, very abstract. And this usually can be found in any kind of a model. It doesn't matter if it's more like a logical model. If you're more in completely different modeling realms, the basic concepts can be usually mapped on this kind of types. So now, the first list we got from the exercise is just this simple list. We got a list of concepts and they are categorized into different categories. So we extracted it from there and we can say, hey, with that, we already can create the hubs in the Data Vault Builder. So let's have a look on how this looks like. And we have here an empty Data Vault Builder environment. We have reset it, so there is nothing in there. We start from scratch. And based on this Excel list that I received, we have mapped it our meta model, and I can go here to our deployment module, select this kind of model for the first step. And now it will compare the deployment package against our local environment. And it will say, hey, this is the list of hubs that shall be created with the metadata we received. You see, I didn't match yet or filled yet the comments from the source. I just had this Excel sheet. It's coming in from the external model. Everything needs to be added because yes, my current target model is empty. So I select just everything and I deploy it. So let's go back to the Data Vault area. And here we already see that the hubs are being created. I just bring everything to my canvas and we see that we have the events, we have the person, subject area, and doc in the middle with a thing area. Conceptual model, not yet helpful, but I could already go to the staging area and start connecting data to my concepts without any relations. That would be possible. It's really about the style, how you want to work, in which order, if you first collect all the information and then generate stuff, or you do an interactive way. So what is the next step? Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Now this model starts to evolve. And here now, some kind of deduplication is happening and some minor changes are done here. So we have done this as well in the Data Vault model. We have regrouped the hubs and I have deployed the second package. To not lose too much time, I skip this step now in the live demonstration, go to the next step, because now it gets very interesting. Slowly it is evolving and now we're creating relations between the different elements. So we have the grooming, that somebody walks the dog, and there's an owner involved, grooming specialist, employee, and the dog. So now let's take this relation, and the cool thing is we get this relation here as Excel sheet, so we can parse the Excel sheet with the Data Vault Builder with an Excel connector. We can read that into our migration vault. Based on that, create a new deployment package. So let's go back to our demo, our deployment package, deployment module. Let's choose now the file for this step. And again, it compares now my evolved model against my existing already loaded model that maybe already could have already data. And we see here the deduplication that's happening, that we need to remove some of the stuff. Then we have some new elements that should be created. And we have here as well some relations. I just deployed that we see it in the model. It makes it much easier to understand. Let's refresh it. There is a question on the Q&A section. Don't worry, I will answer that afterwards. But First, I want to show here some stuff. And here we get our first relation between the objects. So we see now that the grooming is here element defining the grain of the connection and involves now the grooming specialist, the employee, the dog, and the owner. And they together this group together shows the process that we have seen. There's one more process coming in. I will skip that, but this is how we have imported it. Now we have not only the concepts, but slowly we are going in the direction of a logical data model where we have the relations and then we can add the business keys. So it's not like we have separated model in here, but we're evolving from the conceptual level down. So it could be that some of the parts of the model are still in conceptual phase, but some are already further and some are already implemented within the same integrated model. Let's go back to the PowerPoint slides, and this is what I was based on as well here. So we have here one process, and we see here as well the nice indication of what is driving this relation. And this is really important information that some people miss when they model the first time. So what happens if now within a grooming, there is another dog? It's still the same grooming, but maybe somebody called in and the dog was replaced. So it's not a new grooming and stuff like that. So it's usually not that this relation exists because all of the components are in there. And if the dog is replaced, it's a new relation. No, usually there's one leading entity like the grooming here that's identifying and then has some relations to other things. So there's then the second element added. And after we have added the two different NBRs from the Excel sheet, we see that we have here as well two relations which are not yet having like, or will never have a driving side. They just create a relation. So we can add them as well. So let's go back then in here in the live demonstration. Let's compare it with the next level. And slowly you see it gets boring because it's just taking everything that we receive, mapping it and importing it step by step. But this makes it a very, very controlled process. And in every step, you know exactly what happened. In Git, you would see all the changes that we applied. So over time, moving in the right direction, and this is reproducible. So even if now your source model will grow, be extended with many different processes, you don't need to then change the import processes on the Data Vault Builder side, but rerun just this pipeline. And that's where we are. So now we have implemented really what we received from the source. We would rearrange that here a little bit and figure out how we want to see that. And we don't want to arrange that again and again. So we would here find our optimal arrangement, how we want to represent this to the business users. Then we can create here a bookmark and work with this view. Now, what happened in the background? Already the database tables were created and are waiting for data. So I could take any element here in my model, query it, and I get the result here from the hub table. But no data is loaded yet. So this is the next step. And this is what I have done additionally. So I have went in there. We have defined as well some sample data that came from the definition files. I've created files with that. And let's import that. And now we will see the value of what we have created at all. And this is the final thing that we want to see. So I load now the extended model. And this model includes new stuff like staging tables, source systems, and loads. And we import it if we click correctly. And now everything comes to life. So if we go back to the PowerPoint, we have seen this model coming from the workshop. It created our model here, or we generated based on that our data model in the Data Vault Builder. And now we extended it with the loads. This means that we don't have just here the elements, but if we go into the staging area, we have source tables connecting to sources. We can go here, start loading the data. We have generated, because we have received the business keys from the Excel sheets, automatically as well the loads into the hubs are there. We could go and start them, and the data will be loaded. But as we don't create everything only isolated, in the background already the master jobs were generated on the model. I haven't created here anything. We can just start the full load. It will stage the data, load it into our raw vault, load it into our satellites, create history, STD type 2, do as of now views on top of it. So we're really production ready, and we can query now the data in here. Let's get back everything on the screen, because in here we have as well the small dots, which are the satellites, and in here we have already now information. I have only one row in here just to demonstrate on the principle. So we have in the satellite some attributes that were added later. We have the business keys for the hubs. The links are loaded already with the keys, but nobody can access the data. That's what I tried to state before. Now, if we go back to PowerPoint, we arrived now at the model phase. It generated the tables, we staged the data, and we loaded it. The next step is we need to go here into the dimensional model and select what we want to output. Happily, some business users already defined that for us. So we can go in here, and based on the data model that will be now represented more like a star, we can start selecting the attributes that we want to output. So we don't need to think anymore if how to join the different tables, especially in the data vault approach where we got a lot of tables by design. We can just go into the model and say, the grain of my interface is the pickup. And I have selected here, when you see highlighted on the right, the customer rating and remarks from the pickup. But from the grooming, I can take the date and the time, and through the connection between these two processes, I can follow up to the doc and the grooming specialist, because the doc is not stored in the pickup, that is just stored with the grooming. And without writing one line of SQL, we can get the output, and it will now hopefully generate us a fully filled data set with the two processes, all the attributes, with the as of now view in that case, because I selected that I don't want to see the full history, but to switch between like the as of now view and the full history with validity start, validity end, and everything, and p tables creation would be just a drop-down selection. I haven't selected yet to write any business rules, so it's just outputting everything one-to-one, but I could add here more business rules later. That's then what the data engineers are doing, so I can publish already the results. And now I worked through all the layers. So data model was imported, created the tables, staging was connected, then the loads were happening. We created the interface. We could go now and add more stuff like business vault loads, materializations, a lot of stuff. But for the time being, we created our first working implementation through all the layers. Data lineage was updated, so we can go filter it, but it's as well accessible on the database level. So we can bring this metadata directly without any modification, just to your reports, to Power BI, Tableau, or Qlik. So people can look at the metadata side by side with their data. The job was created, and we can schedule it right here. So we can say we have here a full load. And let's time that maybe to run this every minute. And from now on, this job is running. You can use external schedulers like the other stuff that you can use external tools, but it has as well a built-in scheduler. And within the next second, it should start here, 1651. We have the documentation that's generated. And this is not a theoretical documentation. If you click here and regenerate, it goes to the database level, and it reads really what is there, not what should be there, and present it to you based on how the stuff was created. So if I would go and delete the doc hub on the database, it would be removed from the documentation automatically. And the last step would be deployments. I could export that here, or what most people do now is that we can go to our Git connector, compare our local environment directly against the Git repository, and then it will show me the list of differences if I want to check it into Git. So that would conclude my demonstration. All the modules are covered at the same time, so we're production ready. We have now a fully working thing from the source to destination with the first interfaces. Yes, they are not final. We're working agile. We need to add maybe some business rules later, but within a few minutes, we get already the first output. And by having the model, and this is what is missing in most other tools, and this is really the crucial bit, is we can now select from the model without knowing every relation, because the relations are documented in the model. Somebody in the initial phase did put in the thinking how the stuff works, what is the meaning, how they relate to each other, and now we can just consume and select by pointing and clicking from the interfaces. Now, let's go to the question section. There's one question which says, when you know the model, what is the best approach for each layer? Staging with delta to raw vault, all context, then it's difficult to do harmonization, or persistent staging and bringing only context you need, so harmonization is far more easy. Hans, you're as well invited to answer. My experience is that the first thing is the integration happens on the business keys. If the business keys are clean, then we try to bring them directly from staging into the raw vault and attach the attributes and the history to them. If I have only a few or many, it doesn't matter, because I'm not harmonizing on the way in. I'm harmonizing on this interface layer that I showed before, so on the way out. Because sometimes we need to do as well different column names, like for if you have here the national banks, we need to deliver them exact column names as they required it, but internal reporting has others. So we do the harmonization on the way out. So it's not that much of an issue. But if the business keys are not clean, we have null values, we have duplicates, and this happens again and again, or we have bitemporal history and the only line key is a technical key, then I would go into persistent staging, store the data there, then go with a cleanup process into the raw vault. Do you want to add something, Hans?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big thing is we know that all the different sources are going to have different semantics, different meaning for the same word as well, and also you're going to have technical issues of key clashes and whatever. So those we're always going to have with us. I think the huge benefit from what we're seeing here today from both these pieces is that if we have a realistic way to create that business map being the target, right? If we can start with that enterprise view as being the target, that's the thing that doesn't change over decades and decades as much as a source system, one of your 15 source systems is changing all the time, right? So you're going to be kind of the, petting the cat the wrong way, right? You're just never really going to win that game. But if you start with a premise of incorporating that business target model first, now what you're saying is let's load it, and then as the problems come up, we'll resolve those as they come up. And that's the only other thing I would add. The benefit of just having this business model is huge.
One question is, can you show the data lineage? So what we see here is we have on the left side the source system. We have two staging tables. We have the elements in the raw vault. We are not using any pit tables yet because I didn't do a CD type 2 output. Here I'm joining together many different objects into one output. There is the business rule section where I didn't add a business rule yet. So it's just an unaltered default business rule, just doing a select star, in fact. And here we have the access layer. This is the object where people will access at the database level. So we could go here into a data viewer and then start querying this like if it would be here or main thing. This is simulating how the business users would access to it. Good. Are there any more questions? One question is how to synchronize data models between the technical implementation and external models, and so far we used the comment section to capture like structured data as well about like source IDs. If you have like really technical tools where you created your ELM model in, to synchronize that back and forward. And this is something that we will extend soon, where you will have per object one external ID exactly for synchronizing in two ways. Because sometimes you see here that maybe the owner needs some changed comment, so you don't want to go back into any other tools. You want to just extend it here and say, okay, owner is whatever. And then the idea is that by having the ID, you can do a two-way sync as well back in other modeling tools, or export it, that you can update your post-it. Good. Time's running a little bit out. I think for me, it's most important really, the business model, in my experience, is stable for a long time. This is why I always stress that you should start with that as well. We're solving a business problem and not a technical problem. It should always create business value. If we create some kind of reporting or data integrations, maybe Hans, if you have something to add to the end.
Yeah, no, I would say that, like we started with, this problem has been known for a long time. I think it hasn't been super realistic to figure out how to pull the pieces together. And what's happening here with Data Vault Builder is awesome because again, it's taking the premise of what can be a realistic long-term enterprise warehouse based on a business view, which is really where we're all trying to get to. So, and you'll find this in the industry that there's a lot of focus now on talking more about, hey, let's get that integrated model, whether it's using different techniques, whatever the techniques are. But this is, in fact, a realistic way of doing it. And I think the passing of the baton here is pretty straightforward and handled well within Data Vault Builder. I think it's a good way to go between the two.
For the Data Vault Builder, you can book a demo from Genesi Academy. They have a lot of good trainings that you can have a look at their schedule and book a training with them. And I think it is as well what you can invite the people to, Hans, as a last thing. And I say already bye and thank you for your attention, but I leave the last words to Hans.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining. And yeah, super exciting that this is feasible. So the answer to the question from the beginning is you can have your cake and eat it too, right? You can have a purely business-facing target model for your warehouse that's realistic and long-term and still leverage automation in a very good way. And again, I think the first realistic end-to-end is right now with what they're doing at Data Vault Builder. If you need some of the Data Vault and Elm training, you can come visit our site.
Thank you as well. It was a pleasure being here with you. Thank you for everybody that attended, and I wish you a nice evening. And bye.
Thank you.